I am happy to be joined with Steve Hawkins, who is the president and CEO of Horizons ETF, a popular guy in the psychedelic space the last few months. How are you?
I'm great, and thank you very much for having me here today.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. Looks like you're located in downtown Toronto. How's life in the big city, the big spoke downtown?
You know, it's beautiful and sunny. We get to grow marijuana in our offices. You know, you can't
It's
complain about
beautiful.
this. It's
New
great.
rules post-COVID, huh? That's the way to get people
Absolutely.
back to work.
Have lots of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well, obviously, you guys made a lot of news. The end of January, Horizons ETF Management launched the first exclusively dedicated psychedelic exchange-traded fund in the industry, which was a big momentum builder for the industry. You came to the market with an ETF that replicates the Selective's AG's North American Psychedelic Index. Before we dive into details, though, maybe give investors an idea as to how much work and planning is involved doing this from scratch, and most importantly, bringing it to market.
Well, it really depends on how complicated the underlying asset class, sector, or target investment scheme that you're looking to do is. With psychedelics, it's a little bit more difficult because of the legalization issues and dealing with the different stock exchanges, dealing with your auditors, dealing with your custodian. All of those third parties have extreme sensitivity to anything that could be deemed to be an illicit drug or illegal in any way, shape, or form. So there's a lot of nuances when you're dealing into the fundamental space. But if you wanted to launch a new TSX 60 ETF, you can probably get it done in 4 or 5 weeks. When you're dealing with psychedelics, like we did with marijuana back in 2017 when we launched the world's first marijuana ETF, there's a lot of nuances you have to deal with in third parties. And we had very, very similar issues with psychedelics as we did with HMMJ when we launched that in 2017. And we started actively looking at this space probably late Q3, and then we finally brought the product to marketplace in February.
What's your take, been with this psychedelic industry and how it's grown in interest rapidly since I think there's always interest there, but now it really came to the forefront when Compass went public last fall. But what's your take been so far of the overall growth of the industry?
I mean, it's still very, very early stage. There's a lot of risk there, but I mean, I think there's a lot of potential benefits.
Yeah.
I love the fact that the companies, for the most part, are going through, full FDA or Health Canada testing protocols and licensing, and that at the end of the day, this industry will be, a prescription over-the-counter, doctor prescribed therapeutics, and I think that has great promise. Ultimately, I'm so happy that the FDA and Health Canada have really sort of loosened the strings a little bit, and John Hopkins came out with a great study last year, which really sort of supported the backbone for a lot of the science which is going into this and the molecular testing. And just going back to like the capital markets and investor interest and things like that. I mean, we haven't seen this sort of buzz going on in this sector outside of maybe GameStop and dealing with Reddit investors, but I mean, just from message board, like the multitude of different investor forums that are talking about psychedelics specifically, it's huge. I honestly, I couldn't believe it, how big it was, and that was really one of the genesis of shit. We got to get into this industry.
100%.
I apologize, my language.
No, that's okay. We're digital. We're digital. We can do this sort of thing. So, do you see similar trends from an investment opportunity with psychedelics as what occurred, let's say, 3-4 years ago with cannabis?
From an investor perspective, absolutely. I mean, it's very, very different industries as a whole, and one is really focused initially on the recreational ability of the and drug use. Here, we're looking at the actual medical therapeutic. Most of the companies are looking at the medical therapeutic route, but just from of how early stage this is from an investor looking at, looking 2016 for the cannabis industry and 2020 for the psychedelic industries. Very, very similar from a capital market structure. Only a few companies, some big IPOs like you mentioned Compass, but Cybin doing the RTO, MindMed coming up from the US to list in Canada. And you're seeing multiple US companies coming to Canada again because of our capital markets access, very, very similar again to the cannabis industry. It'll be very, very interesting when we have our first sort of Tilray of psychedelics, where we have a Canadian company who avoids the Canadian capital markets and lists it, directly on NYSE. That'll be an interesting take when we see that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you mentioned before, like biotech stocks, psychedelics, they can be extremely volatile. You've seen recent trading at new highs and new lows within like a 4-week period, which can be obviously expected early on in the industry. Saying that, is the volatility something you can control, or is it something that is a byproduct of the high risk reward in growth markets?
I, I mean, there is some level of control on an overall basis, but it really is a function of the one. These are micro cap companies for the most part as
Yep.
well, right? Most of them don't even meet the criteria of small cap. So micro cap, again, volatility, and the fact that investor interest is really booming at this point in time, and people are looking for growth opportunities. Psychedelics and cannabis companies are right at the forefront of that. I mean, the cannabis stocks like even, Afria, Aurora,
Yep.
Canopy. I mean, we're seeing these things go up and down 5% every single day at
I
a
know.
minimum, right? I mean, it's huge volatility. And these are multi-billion-dollar market cap companies. I mean, you apply that to a $50-75 million market cap psychedelic company, and you're going to get more volatility, right? So,
Welcome to the 21st century investor, right, Steve?
absolutely. This is not for the faint of heart, right? You gotta,
No.
make your play. You gotta be committed, and then you just gotta hold on real tight, and sometimes close your eyes, right? It's just, this industry is not for
I think a
those
lot of people are
investors.
closing their eyes. I don't know necessarily if they're sitting tight, right? But that's the world we live in now. You want something, go on to Amazon and it's on your doorstep in 2 seconds. And I think a lot of people view their investments the same way.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about investor response. You just indicated it's been obviously a lot of interest. What's the reaction been like so far since the ETF launched, especially with Lowe's looking to mitigate their risk in a sector that is still new yet so full of potential?
I mean, we've had a lot of self-directed interest, and that's very, very similar again to sort of cannabis when we launched the world's first cannabis ETF in 2017. There's a lot of people that want to get into this space, and they don't want to bet on one individual company. And the ETF provides that sort of diversified basket of sort of all of the companies that are in there, and it's one of the reasons why we built the index the way it was. There is some big farm in there, so there is some stability on an overall basis to the ETF, but ultimately that big pharma interest will go down as
Yep.
there are more and more psychedelics company. I mean, we have an upcoming. I mean, just recently there were 2 new companies that did IPOs, and we put them into the index and the ETF right away through the fast ad rule. We have a rebalancing coming up end of this week, next week, with the index and the ETF, and there's probably 10 new possible names that could be going into this
Interesting.
space. So it's growing very, very quickly from a capital markets perspective, from a number of names perspective. When we launched HMMJ, we only had a portfolio of 16 names. And by the end of the year, we had 70 names in the portfolio. I mean, that's how quickly the cannabis capital markets grew. And I see the exact same thing happening here with psychedelics.
Last week, I was speaking to a CEO with one of the companies that recently went public, and he was saying that he was speaking to a number of investors over in Switzerland who invested the space 12 months ago, and they only had a handful of companies to pick and choose from. In the next 12 months, they're predicting over 500 companies looking to go public within this industry. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but needless to say, there's a lot of popularity. I want to shift our focus now on the Select AG North's American Psychedelic Index, which is designed to provide exposure in the North American publicly listed life sciences companies that do business in the psychedelic space. Horizon's Psychedelic Stock Index seeks to replicate that under its underlying tracking vehicle. So take me through how this works. Do you consult Selective when it comes to things like index weighting, on which additions and subtractions should be made?
So for clarity, it's actually Horizons Index. So we've just called it the North American Psychedelic Stock Index.
Okay.
Selective AG is the calculation agent. For HMMJ, differently, the North American Marijuana Index, Selectively is the owner of that index and does do all of the back end work for determining the underlying companies that are going into that index. They do consult with the public, but at the end of the day, their index committee makes the decisions. For
Duly
the
noted.
psychedelics one, actually Horizons is the one. We have our own index committee, so this is a self-index product per se.
Okay.
But it is a passive index as well, though. So we're not actively making decisions of what companies should weight in there. Everything is float market cap weighted.
Gotcha.
We've created minimums, but as the industry sort of evolves, as sort of there's a self-fulfilling, growing maturement to this industry. The minimum stock price, the minimum trading volume, the minimum market cap, which are all necessity to get into the index. All of those things will increase over time. So we used a lot of what we learned from the HMMJ index to create the PSYK index. And the HMMJ's index in the sort of 3+ years since we launched that ETF has changed 8 times from a structure perspective.
Right.
We expect the same thing to happen with the PSYK. We just wanted to have more control over it ourselves rather than relying on Selective AG. Though Selective AG is a great index provider and we use them for a lot of our indices. In this case here, we wanted to have more control over it, but we wanted it calculated by a third party, and that's where Selective really falls into it.
Well,
so Horizons is the index provider, and then really our index committee make the decisions at the end of the day, what names go in, what names come out, if they've changed, business operations or whatever. We review the companies for their trading volume, for the market cap, for the trading price, recent IPOs, RTOs of companies coming to marketplace. So we're actively almost every day, because this industry is changing so rapidly right now. We're pretty much reviewing that universe of potential psychedelic companies every day or every other day. So
that's interesting.
It's very, very quickly changing.
Well, you said earlier, it's still very early, which is 100% truth within this industry. But given the overall level of interest, what do you anticipate how this industry expands and grows over the next 12 months?
I would say it's going to continue to grow very, very rapidly. I mean, there's a lot of investors out there that are looking for the potential growth prospects of these companies. To answer your question earlier, which I didn't really do a very good job of, we raised pretty much $60 million in the first month of operation of the fund. And that $60 million gets 100% invested back into these psychedelic companies, which
it's a great start.
It's a great start. There's not a lot of ETFs that can get that big of a start right out of the gate. And this really goes, one, to support the capital markets behind these industry. It helps solidify the investor base for these underlying psychedelic companies from an institutional perspective. And it gives them the capital necessary to be able to, and comfort to be able to grow those companies going forward, to do other capital markets raises, stock offerings, and things like that. But so to your latest question, we really see this industry growing substantially. Right now we know that J&J has their ketamine-based nasal spray, Spravato, approved. But that's really the only main drug that is on the marketplace from a approved prescription possibility. There's a lot of drugs that are in phase testing right now. There's a lot of drugs that are being clinically used by psychologists. For
the feedback's been very promising so far.
The micro dosing and things like that. I mean, we just see the potential use of these the different variations of psilocybin and LSD and DMT and all of those things as so potentially profound on our social existence as it stands right now. With there's over 700 million people worldwide suffering from some sort of mental illness, addiction, major depression, all of these things, and these are all potentially treatable by these different therapies that are coming to, that I believe will come to market And once one of them starts to come to market, I think we're going to see a huge boom in this industry. Not just like the 500 companies that you mentioned that could be coming to marketplace, but I mean just the fact that there's going to be so much more investor interest coming into this sector simply because of the possibilities and social change that this could that psychedelics could bring about with our everyday lives is
100%.
just phenomenal.
And I think that's the number one reason why there's so many people that are so interested, obviously, within this industry. Last thing I want to ask you, and I know you want to talk about psychedelics all day, don't you? But maybe we should ask, looking ahead, are there any other emerging sectors on your radar which might attract enough investor interest to create a new ETF vehicle? If so, what are they?
Well, technology right now can be sliced and diced so many different
Yeah.
ways, and you've got the huge run on Nasdaq and all of the subsectors underneath Nasdaq, and people are just dividing these companies up in many different ways. I mean, after we launched HMMJ in 2017, I was like, for another 5 years, there isn't going to be another sector like this with so much self-directed investor base following out there in North America. And I was wrong, because it only took 2.5 years basically for the psychedelics industry to start coming to fruition. I don't know what the next sort of cannabis to psychedelics to end industry is, but I mean, you have to look hard at anything from uranium, lithium, hydrogen, anything that can help with our environment going forward. And I'm not specifically like ESG focused, but I mean underlying commodities and companies that are participating in these industries, which could again change the way that we do business every day, how we travel every day. Those are all developing technologies that we have to be very wary of, and that got to keep a good spotlight on.
Yeah. Great feedback, and I appreciate all the information. Listen, I know you're a busy guy, but I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. Let's keep in touch. And again, great work with the obviously ETF that launched back in January, and interesting to see where this continues to develop.
Shad, thank you very much for having me today, and we're excited to be here. And please have us back soon when we reach $1 billion.
Okay, we'll have you back tomorrow then, if that's the case. Steve, take your time.
Okay. Thanks, Shad.